And welcome to DiversiTV. If you're just tuning in, welcome. And if you are returning to us, we're not actually repeating topics tonight, just as we were talking about last week, is spirituality and religion. We'll be talking about that with our guest. Let's go to slide. So DiversiTV's mission, if you're just tuning in, is to illuminate everyday diversity issues and give the mic and the camera to those who don't always get it. And basically, this is our third season. And so from season to season, we basically repeat the pattern, usually starting, since we're on Turtle Island, with Native perspective, then Anglo, African Americans in Eugene, Latino, Longhouse update, Pan-Asian perspective. We had a visit from Black Pioneer family. A couple of weeks ago, we had a youth, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, queer questioning, two-spirit perspective. Last week was class, and this week is spirituality and religion. Now, we've done spirituality and religion a couple of different ways, usually involving native spirituality, and just in keeping with our theme, if you go back to slide again. So spirituality is like a personal sense of connection to something greater than yourself. Personal connection to the transpersonal, if you will, which can be validated by a community. Spirituality is the connection, and it can and does exist without a religion. So a person can communicate their experiences to a community and begin to share that experience and communicate that experience, which may or may not be accepted. Thus, one of my standing jokes about what's the difference between a madman and a saint, they may both see the exact same thing, but the madman will basically talk about it to anybody and anyone and in any terms. The saint knows who not to talk to and what to say to whom. So the other piece with spirituality and religion, a religion can then begin with a person or people's spiritual experiences when those are codified into a prescribed and agreed upon set of communications. Axioms, proverbs, sayings, rituals, scripture, holy books, and cosmologies for others who may not have experienced a collective transpersonal experience, including the young, and that constitutes a religion. So a religion, in short, could be a set of prescribed exercises to develop spirituality. But has been noted, spirituality can exist without a religion, and religion can exist without spirituality. So the Abrahamic religions, which are those that revere the patriarch Abraham's, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, enjoy a sort of degree of name familiarity, at least in the American context, and varying degrees of acceptance, if not privilege, though that is mostly relegated to Christianity. And as our previous shows on the topic have shown with respect to native spirituality, basically, if my sacred Black Hills, if I were Lakota, can be usurped and then have visages of 4 white guys carved into it, is that an improvement? You mean, wait a minute, Creator makes a mountain and you decide that it's improved by putting 4 white guys in it? Like, why is that an improvement? And in whose view? And whose religion is then being ignored or not? So while 9/11 focused some attention and interest on one Semitic language community, the other more commonly accepted Semitic community, relatively speaking, often remains a mystery to folks. So I decided to start from a layperson's perspective, not so much, our guest tonight, is an expert on her personal experience. And she would agree with that. And so that led to our inviting this guest tonight. And Anna Kate Malliris, Jewish community member, Lane Community College employee. Welcome.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
So where are you from?
Well, I guess technically I'm from LA, but I moved here when I was 2. So I'm almost a native Oregonian and almost a native Eugenian.
Okay. 2.
2.
Wow.
My father came to study at the university, and he had driven up the Pacific Northwest and landed here and said, hot dog, this is it. So here we were.
The promised land, as it were.
The green land.
The green land, right. So all your life. So there's a quote that I Googled because Anna Kate has helped me out with our Rites of Passage program. Looking at, I was basically trying to give an overview of different religions to our kids. And so I Googled on a word that she had given me, and there's a quote from drash.org: "To be Jewish requires work." So what does it take to be Jewish, and what kind of work is required to be a, quote, good Jew, unquote?
Well, there's a nice broad question. Being Jewish is a little bit of a nebulous term because it spans biology and ethnicity, religious belief, and cultural norms.
Okay.
So, and like Christianity, Judaism has a lot of different veins with different perspectives and ways of looking at their own identity. I guess for a lot of people it's a biological ethnic reality.
Okay.
My mother's Jewish. I'm Jewish. It's real simple. And for some people that would define being Jewish. For a lot of people that would define being Jewish. When we think in terms of common culture, we think of Jewish as a religious belief. And most certainly it is. You know, it includes a belief system revolving around monotheism and the Old Testament, and we're still waiting for the Messiah, and, you know, some pretty broad, somewhat understood theological perspectives. It's more complex than that because we also have a different liturgical calendar.
Yeah.
And a different calendar of marking
Altogether,
time.
right.
And that living in some sync with that liturgical calendar certainly in some ways defines being Jewish. But then there's lots of people who don't, and they're Jewish all the same. We have rituals like every other religion that would mark our experience of being Jewish. And people participate in those rituals to differing degrees. They're still all Jewish. And then we have this kind of group that we've, as a religion, as a culture, as a group of people, have struggled with in some ways, and that would be people who are Jewish by choice. Unlike Christianity, where that is a normal pathway into the religion.
The choosing piece.
Is the choosing piece.
Yeah, yeah.
That's been a different pathway for a lot of Jewish people. So we can, you know, I can think about being Jewish in those terms, and then I can think of it in the cultural sense that much like early Catholics had Latin for a secondary or primary religious language, we have Hebrew.
Yeah.
We've had Yiddish as a
right.
tangential language. We have a set of cultural norms that range from marriage rituals and challenges around that to...
That came up as a joke recently. Did you see that?
No.
Okay, so Spitzer, who, you know, lost his governorship,
Right.
Was replaced by Patterson, who is legally blind, right?
Right.
And so one of the Jewish members basically talked about he had to stop Patterson from bringing the gavel down at the podium on his water glass because he didn't want to turn the New York State Legislature into a Jewish marriage ceremony.
There you go.
Okay, and so a lot of people, you know, I mean, I've officiated, you know, and seen that particular ceremony, where, you know, the rabbi, or in the case of me doing this particular thing for this particular limited set of circumstances, basically said that your love is like a vessel and it can't be contained, so, you know.
Gone.
Right,
Dispersed.
Right, so you step on the glass, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay. So that was interesting to see that, you know, used as a form of humor. And when you talk about the different liturgical like breakdown liturgical, for those of you who don't have a dictionary handy.
We're not celebrating Christmas.
Okay.
We're not celebrating Easter. Our calendar would revolve around Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
Okay.
in the fall, and Passover, Pesach in the spring.
Purim.
Purim just happening. And even more fundamental than that, our Sabbath, sundown to sundown, Saturday, as opposed to Sunday. And that plays out in a plethora of ways as we try and navigate a culture that has a different rhythm.
What year is it?
57.
Okay. Right. So, different calendar.
Different months, different cycle. But for me, a different rhythm in my life. I mean, I think for a lot of people, their lives are run on a rhythm that is defined by the choices they make around their faith.
Yes.
People go to church on Sundays. People go to church on Wednesday nights. This is a rhythm that defines how they're going to schedule themselves and interact with their world and their work and their children and their friends. And it creates this lovely rhythm. And I would say for a lot of Jewish people, that's a huge part of that experience, is living that rhythm and the recycling. When we, roll back the Torah and we start over, there's a rhythm to that of, okay, I've seen this 47 times, and yet it will renew itself, and I will start over, and I will turn it and spin it and look at it differently. And I don't think it's different. It's just it's not a different experience holistically. It's just a different set of holidays. It's a different rhythm. It has a different tenor to it. And I find lots of times that I'm sort of disconnected from the rhythm that is the predominant rhythm.
Right. It would be difficult. I mean, and that's one of the things, there's lots of different directions we could go in any of the things that you've talked about. Just calendar, different rhythm, different set of holidays, each with its particular set of history, which drives that, drives this worldview. I thought personally, one of the things that I thought was particularly cool was the lack of proselytizing. Yeah.
And which is very tied to that idea of Jews by choice. I can only speak of my experience. It's a really, for me, being Jewish, studying the Torah, exploring the universe through a lens is how I live, how I try to bring that, what I would term that divine spark, from inside to outside. It's how I choose to relate to people. And that's the experience. It's both the receiving and the giving. Not recently, maybe a year ago, we had a drash at a Friday night service where Rabbi Maurice Harris said, here's the drill. Look at the person next to you and talk to them. But really look for that spark. Be intentional. Don't be just running through the motions so that you can move forward, but spend the time to really see inside of what they're saying and try and see who they are. Try and see that divine spirit and the intentionality. And it doesn't matter what you talk about. So I was sitting next to a quite older gentleman who I didn't particularly well know. I had seen him. And we started talking, and he was telling me about his life, about being older, and he'd lost his wife and the challenges of finding his new place. And I don't even remember a whole lot about it, but I do remember him, the essence of who he was. And importantly, I remember now that I felt a connection that often I don't, because I'm in a hurry, because I'm just transmitting information, and that's all I need to do. You tell me this, I tell you that, we move along.
Right.
So having that moment to say, let me just see it, let me just see that connection. And I know that over the last year, whatever it's been, I don't know how long it's been, there have been a lot of times when I've been really challenged by people what they were saying, what they were thinking, where they were coming from, them, and stopping and saying, wait a minute, there's got to be something here that's divine, that's light, that's spark, that I can see into this person. And when I do that, when I do it with intentionality, it's amazing where I find myself. It doesn't mean I love them or want to spend all my time with them. It just connects you to somebody in a different kind of way.
Yeah.
So for me, and I think for a lot of Jewish people, that's really the experience of trying to become what we ideally are meant to be, to share that in a really good way in the world to the best of our abilities, and to see it in the people around us. And it's not about making them us. They don't have to. You don't
Right.
have to be Jewish
Right.
for me to see that spark.
Yeah.
We don't have to share that common framework. We just have to see in each other that thing that, at least I believe, is in every person. And so it's not the, I don't have an agenda. I just, in that moment when you make the decision and you slow down and you find it in yourself and you look for it in somebody else, voila, that's the experience.
So did that come from any particular, I mean, you referenced Torah, so 5 books of Moses, etc., right? Did that come from any particular line, midrashic teaching?
You know, we kind of all fall back to the Shema,
Okay.
to the oneness.
Listen, Israel, Shema.
Shema
Israel.
Yisrael.
Yeah, right.
And I'm not a Torah scholar. I'm a wannabe Torah understander, which isn't an easy thing to do, really.
Yeah.
And I think that for me and for a lot of people, it is that search to understand that there really is a oneness, that there isn't this separation, that we aren't fundamentally different, that you know, there's a lot of superficial stuff that if you want to go to the Kabbalist and be really mystic, is just facade. It's just the things that we do to make ourselves separate or individual or special or safe or, you know, all of that stuff that we all do, but isn't necessarily real.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be the reality. And so I think we try, you know, lots of Jewish people try and keep that foremost on their doorposts, on their eyes, and in the forefront of their thoughts to say, okay, you're really different, and you're really annoying me, or you're really challenging me, or you're really uncomfortable to me, and yet that's a little bit of artifact. We're really one. We're one thing bound together by this divine spark, and I just got to find it.
Yeah. So doorposts like the mezuzah.
The
for
mezuzah,
example.
sure.
And you mentioned Kabbalah, which, you know, got recently some name familiarity with the whole Madonna thing.
The red.
Yeah, right. And okay,
Whatever.
so other, you know, particularly natives, this comes up a lot with a whole stereotypical plastic shaman, you know, commodification or cultural appropriation of different things like, you know, Kabbalah and, you know, I don't know if you'd say bagels or whatever, but I mean, that's, you know, the stereotypes, you know, growing up in Los Angeles, like, okay, my first exposure to, there was an awareness, right? You know, was World Series, Sandy Koufax doesn't pitch a game because it's a holiday, and on that holiday, half the school's gone.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, where are they? Well, they're Jewish. What's that?
Yeah.
Who are
And
they? They just
so-
look like white people to me.
Yeah.
Like, okay, Goldfarb, Himmelstein, you know, whatever. You know, some stereotypical names, maybe, but, you know, other than if you see a Star of David,
Which you may or may not
which
even
you may or may
recognize.
not, right? You know, then who are these people? And you know, gradually finding that out. So I mean,
Well, I think, you know, the things that we don't know about, we
Yeah.
look for the visible
right?
signposts so that we know that's there. And so, like in all, I mean, I guess if I see a priest walking down the street, I identify by wardrobe that this is a person of Catholic faith.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps me to put the landmarks. It's a little squishier when the signposts aren't real visible. They're hard to read.
Right.
And one of the things I was thinking about today is that unlike a lot of people of different ethnicity, people of color, I'm not always pegged. I can say I have been plenty of times. But what that does is kind of frightening, because you hear what people are saying behind your back because they're saying it to your face.
Right.
And sometimes they're even asking your agreement on it. And it's a very strange experience. So I think it's comforting for people a lot of times to have the signpost, because it tells them either beware, watch what you say, stay clear, scary, engage. Some people, it's a signpost to engage. It makes them curious.
This is an
and
example, because it's television, right? So
give an example. Well, I actually...
a common one. Oh, you don't look Jewish.
Oh, what I've heard?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
You know, I've had people engage with me a lot around holidays, Christmas time, and talk to me about how, you know, it's so unfair that they, whoever they are, won't let us, whoever we are, do what we want to do to celebrate our holiday.
Right.
Isn't that awful?
They, yes.
And it's on my better days, it's a teachable moment. It's a moment to engage. It's a moment to hopefully take some of the mystique away, because now they is somebody that you know, who maybe you've eaten at their house or talked to their children, or, you know, spent time with them. At other times, it's just more energy than I have, and
Yeah.
I can passively disagree. And at other times, it's just frustrating. And it makes me, it challenges me to decide
Well, to see that spark, that
how
divine
to
spark
interact.
for one.
Yeah, partly that. No, not so much that. I mean, I guess you could frame it that way. It doesn't make me question whether they have the divine spark. It makes me question how much I want to look for it. How much energy I have in that moment to say, okay, if I'm going to look past the content of the conversation we're having to the content of what you're expressing, and I can frame it like anybody in so many different ways. And some of it's who it is and how they're approaching me and in what manner they're doing it and where their heart seems to be coming from. For some people, it comes from a place of pain. I feel that they feel diminished in their ability to have their experience. And in that, I can really relate. And sometimes it's just a place of anger. Somebody took something away from me.
Yeah.
And it depends on where they're coming from. It depends on where I am. It is that connection and where you are about making that connection, because nobody walks around all the time with their sparking and their intense goggles on.
Right.
You'd just be non-functional.
Pretty much.
But it is that moment of realization that you're on the outside and nobody knows it.
Right.
And they're unabashed in sharing
How outside
their
you
feelings
are,
about you as the subject of their confusion, and it happens more often than I would care to say. I've had people say to me, well, Jewish people believe in Jesus, don't they?
Well,
there's a loaded question.
There is a loaded question, and
what's embedded behind it is huge.
Well, okay. So, I mean, you actually opened it up, and in case people didn't know, I mean, okay, so we're still waiting for the Messiah, right? So there's that piece. There is, things that I've read, and basically trying to look at the commonalities between the Abrahamic religions and other pieces about. I mean, reading this book written by a Jesuit. Okay, Rabbi Jesus. Like, okay, I'm still trying to wrap my head around Chilton's. I mean, it's a good book, and it was turned on to me by my brother-in-law because my kid sister converted, right? So, there's that question of, the whole. Okay, you marry a British Jew who's pro-Palestinian, record executive, et cetera, and you're a doctor, and you live in Park Slope in New York, and you're raising your sons. And so what are we doing? Is it Chris Mahana, Kwanzaa? What are we doing? I mean, because you converted. They converted, right? She converted, and... there's that piece about choosing, and then, okay, so the Messiah piece, because Chilton then talks about, well, he's a mamzer, which technically he's not Jewish. I mean, you've actually even said that to me. Well, Jesus wasn't actually Jewish, so explain that.
Thank you, Mark.
I could. I can do it, but, here you are, right? Is that something you learned in Hebrew school, or I don't know.
I think that. Wow. Thanks, Mark.
Do you want me? I can frame that.
I think what's challenging is I'm just going to reframe it.
Yeah.
Because
feel free.
I think that part of what we try and do in building relationships with people is to find the common ground, and this is one of those areas where common ground is real darn hard to come by.
Yes, it is.
That, if you're and I don't present myself as a Christian scholar, I don't present myself as a Jewish scholar. If you are a person who says, this is the path, this is the only path, there's not a lot of room to move.
Nope. Right.
If you say, this isn't the path, this isn't the person, we're still waiting, there isn't a lot of room to move. And the question becomes, is there a way to find some common ground? Is there a way, maybe not even to find common ground, but to find a space for everybody?
I think there is.
And I personally, I'm of the belief that I just would choose, I choose to believe that God is this huge, dimensionless creator of, wrap your mind around it because I can't. And I cannot imagine within that not being enough room at the table for everybody, that there aren't more paths than one. And that
there would have to be.
And that from the way I try and interact with people who are, unfortunately, we're kind of locked by history and theology in this zero-sum game, is maybe to say, what's right for you is right for you. You win. What's right for me is right for me. I win. What's right for somebody else, that it at its core is about this divine presence, this connectiveness, this, I don't know, spirituality isn't a word that resonates for me, but within your definition, the sense of things bigger, this creative power, this light. We use water a lot as sort of the imagery. Allows us all to find within us and outside of us and in other people all of those things that define what religion and faith and spirituality and belief and hope and more words than I know how to say, what we're all seeking.
You at a loss for words.
I know, shocking, isn't it? It's the only subject. And I think that if we could get to a place in our in our beings where we could say, what I hope for you is that you find that. Not what I hope for you is that you agree with me.
Yes, right.
And that
Good.
would be the place where I think proselytizing challenges me. Because my daughter asked me when she was very young, she fell in love with a Catholic boy. And she said, Mom, how would you feel if I decided to be Catholic?
Go.
That was right after the whole conversation about her being adopted. It was huge. And it was one of those moments that I said, I don't have an easy answer for you. Let me think about it, but I promise, after I have a chance to think, I'll answer your question. And a couple days went by, and I really thought about it. This is the just most precious human being in my universe. And I wanted to give her an answer that was honest and that would address what is bigger than the Catholic boy she was in love with. It was the reality of what her life was going to be.
Yeah.
And the answer I could give her is, it would make me sad. And I want for you to find in your life that thing that fills you up in the way that being Jewish fills me up.
Yeah.
And if that's Catholicism, or if it's Buddhism, or if it's whateverism, bring it on.
Yeah.
Because this has been very powerful in my life, and what I want her to have is that same experience. The sadness comes from some of the practical, how sad would it be to sit in a high holy day service and not have her there with me?
Right. But there's also the weight of that other history too, where, that Chilton talked about in his book about, the Catholic Church has been one of the biggest major persecutors of Jews. So here's the irony of me writing this book. Nonetheless, here we go.
I don't want to diminish that. I don't disagree in any way with you. But when I think about it in a really human level, and I separate myself from the head, and I go to the heart, which for me is where faith resides, it isn't about what label you put on yourself. It isn't about the rituals. There would be a sadness in not sharing. And I have that sadness in a lot of ways. Christmas comes, and I have a sadness in not sharing in that rhythm, because there's so much good.
Yeah.
And in many people, I see that welling of that sense of connectedness and centeredness and bringing out the best in a person, and
at least espousing it anyway. And some people do feel it.
Well, I'm picking to talk about the people who really,
right.
And I relate to it so much. And just because it's falling at a different time in my liturgical calendar, and Hanukkah isn't Christmas, so I long for that. Just like I feel it so strongly during times when it's meaningful to me. So there's a piece of me that, regardless of whether it's my daughter, it's somebody else, there would be this sort of sadness and envy and gratitude. But mostly what I see in people who really experience their faith in a very deep, meaningful, lived, productive way is me, is a sense of, I get it. I get that feeling, and I love that in people. And I don't really care where I see it. As I started out with, that divine spark doesn't live in Jewish people or Christian people, or it lives in all people.
All people. Yeah.
And so when I see that in people, when I see it welling up, I think it's fabulous. And I myself can't imagine living without that real sense of grounded. I'm in it. Sometimes I use the saying, sometimes I'm there and sometimes I'm just sitting there. And we all go through those phases. when we're there, I'm all over it. And sometimes I'm there and I'm like, I wish I was there. I'm just.
Yeah.
But whoever you are and wherever you're getting it, if you're in that space where you really feel you're having that connected experience and it's bringing out the best in you and you're elevated in the way that you interact in the world, and go for it.
Yeah.
And I just don't see it as a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
And I hope I wouldn't see it within my own family. I certainly don't see it as I walk around. But it doesn't change that lots of people do see it that way, and that's a hard, it's a hard road to walk down.
Yeah. What would you say, what are some of the strengths that you draw from being Jewish? I mean, you've talked about some of them.
Well,
especially when it's difficult.
I have to look at my notes because, you know, I have many thoughts.
Wow, look at those notes.
Look at that. Yeah, it's the lawyer in me. What can I say? You know, it's hard to explain to anybody, and I wouldn't presume to, the internal experience a person has of faith.
Right. Yeah.
And even within my own family, people have had a different sort of sense of what that means.
2 Jews, 3 opinions, or more?
More than that. I remember sitting with my father in the synagogue and going home and him saying, I know there's something people are getting that I'm not getting.
And what would that be? What was your first clue, if there was a clue that you just,
Well, you know, I think some of it is that people get a lot out of ritual. I
Yeah.
get a lot out of ritual.
Yeah.
It resonates with me. He was he was in his head a lot. And so for him to find that space where it didn't have to make sense and you didn't have to analyze it and you could just let go and it could just fill you up. And then my daughter became bat mitzvah. And the constellation of that event was the first time my dad said, I get it. I had it. I had that thing that I've watched lots of people get. I don't know if I'll hold on to it.
Because he had been bar mitzvahed.
No.
No?
No. Mm-mm.
Your mother's Jewish, your father is
My
not?
father's Jewish.
Okay, okay. He had not been bar mitzvahed?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
All
He
right.
had not become bar mitzvah. He grew up in a Jewish family. Both of his parents were Jewish. You know, the history of Jews in America is one that moves windingly through generations. And my mom laughs and says, we got the kid who was Jewish in her diapers, you know, and it wasn't always easy for them because that was not their life experience. They were they're culturally Jewish, they're ethnically Jewish. They would have identified themselves religiously Jewish, but the rituals, the experience, the sort of being in that was not necessarily always the experience that they had. And so to see one of the strengths I get from being Jewish is that experience of being in that place and being centered and knowing, and it's this intrinsic belongingness and being there and saying, it fits, it's right, I get it.
Yeah.
And that goes across places. You know, I've been fortunate, we've traveled a lot, and to walk into a synagogue in another country and sit and be there and it's you and it makes sense and it's like putting on an old
Even if
coat.
it's a different denomination, so to
Oh,
speak,
yeah.
you know, not Reformed, not Hasidim.
You know, it certainly presents some of the challenges with the rituals because you're not, it would be sort of like a Catholic who'd never gone to a Latin Mass, sitting in a Latin Mass, and yet I imagine the feeling very much the same. That, yeah, there's a rhythm, it makes sense, it's familiar, it's right, and it fits me, and I'm here, and all of these people are here with me, and yeah. That's very powerful for me. I think it's very powerful for a lot of people. But there's some cultural things about being Jewish that's way cool. I think.
Come on, out with it. Like what? You're not proselytizing,
I'm not.
but okay.
No, not selling it because you
No,
just kind of got to be there. But I think the relationship between men and women in Jewish families is markedly different than mainstream.
Good different?
Good to me.
Yeah, okay.
Don't know if it's good in general.
Okay.
And I think there are some stereotypes that frame it very not good.
Mm-hmm.
Women are very forceful in Jewish culture. They're strong,
Mm-hmm.
and they're opinionated,
Mm-hmm.
and they're I just remember growing up and being told by my father, which was a little bit of a unique experience, no, you go forth and get what you want, what you deserve, what you need, you ask for, you demand, you have a right.
I think that's
You're
fully
entitled.
within the tradition, and there's some history behind that and why that is so.
Sure,
Definitely.
and I think that's an amazing gift to give a young woman. It's not necessarily,
As a father of daughters, yes.
but it's
clearly.
not necessarily true across all veins of Judaism.
No.
So you can't
Right.
generalize. I can say in my liberal tradition, yeah, that was very cool.
Yeah.
Some of the kind of intactness of families, and that's not to say that there aren't divorces and there aren't,
Extended
all
family,
of the things,
not
but
just
there's
the
this sort of
nuclear.
multi-generational layering
Right,
that
right.
has been a bit more preserved,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's amazing that children know their grandparents
Yes.
in a
And are connected with grandparents.
and grandparents are still making sacrifices
Yeah.
for their grandkids and
Right.
being there. I think that and I would say this is true for any group that's in the minority or not swimming in the mainstream. It creates a certain strength and courage to walk out in the world every day and be true to who you are and find a way to navigate and be successful and create relationships without giving up the essence of who you are.
Right.
And
Even if they think you're a little mashugana.
and you gotta, you gotta confront people sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
which is a talent that you hope you learn over time. And I was talking to you just today, and I said, I'm going to call anybody who's saying anything that I think is discriminatory, is oppressive, and I will. And I've stood up, and I think it's one of the things that is the good and the bad of being in a group that has had a history of oppression. My daughter talks about in high school having to walk up and confront a friend because she was making fun of somebody for their religious garb, or in one case because they're Jewish. And the courage that it takes in your life to walk up to somebody and say, don't be saying that. Don't be doing that.
Yeah.
That is not okay, is a gift to a person. It's a curse too, but it's a gift.
Chutzpah is...
It's not easy.
Yeah, it's not easy, right. But, it again is following a tradition. And
It is.
so there is those pieces of it where, the inculcation, I don't know that I gotta say this, but it's in the forefront of my mind. In terms of like building bridges, right? Understanding one of the things that has, I think, sometimes been lost in Christianity, and I'll say that to the degree that I'm Christian, to the degree, because people will disagree that I am, but I was raised a particular way, and so following that tradition, when I read books like Chilton and he says, okay, well, Mary was 13 and pregnant with him, and basically just like you said, okay, my mother was Jewish, so I'm Jewish. At that time, it was like, okay, we need to know who your daddy. Because if we don't know who your daddy is, then no, you can't go to temple, and boom, so Mary wouldn't say. So, and nobody was going to be buying that divine conception thing, because no. You ain't saying because there's something, it's incest, rape, or whatever. So in his own town, he couldn't go to temple, not even to go to his father's funeral, which kind of made him mad. But he goes to Jerusalem. Nobody knows him, small town Bethlehem, and so he can kick it with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and John and all those kind of things. Well, you know.
Only you.
Only me. Only me can get away with that, because, when I'm teaching my class, this stuff in my class and saying, look, in his time, there's like 200 different, at least 200 different branches of Judaism. And Solomon's temple is for all of them to come together. That's the purpose of it. But, in that time also you've got people, doing, 5 different conquerors, the nation of Israel, people burning pig offerings and all that kind of stuff. So the central question about identity in the nation of Israel is, who's your daddy? And so, according to Chilton, right? So looking at part of that tradition where I started reading about the place of women and strong women in that early church, like, what if Mary Magdalene had been the leader of the church and not Peter, not Paul? Where would we have gone? Would we be having holy wars and crusades and pogroms and the ghettos? And would we be having any of that kind of stuff? I don't think so. So for me, well, maybe not. Then I start looking at the pieces where you look at the different sects within any religion, and are we as accepting of this group who's supposed to be within our nation as these others?
And it's not to say that we're also, nicely united in our little ball of Judaism, because we're not. And we're challenged in the same ways to decide what makes and what doesn't make somebody appropriately Jewish. And we face those kinds of challenges daily. But I think it's one of those in the family things. You're in the family. Within my family, we're going to argue about politics, and we're going to argue about all sorts of things with some basic understanding that we're all striving for something really good and for the good of all of us. And it would be nice if our family was large enough to encompass greater, broader deviations, and to accept that it's okay to have a different path. It's okay. Just
it really
walk
okay.
your path, till your path really well. Create good things. Make good things happen around you and to the people around you, and not just to the Jewish people around you or just to the people around you. Just be that light somewhere as much as you can, and leave that perspective to the people behind you. And it is not ever to say forget, because as a person of color, part of what we teach our children is what the world's really going to hold for them, what the reality of their life experience might be, what the horrors have been, and why, walking through a concentration camp. You know me. I'm like, la, 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 la. And I was filming, and we're watching the film after we got home many, many months later. And my daughter was 5, and my father...
Which one?
Which daughter?
Which camp? Bergen?
Dachau.
Dachau. Okay.
And my father walked off with my daughter, and all I have on the whole film is just this picture of this man who was younger and robust, very hunched over, and my daughter, who was young, walking on the curb that had been the foundation for the building, and looking at him like something's wrong. But I'm just sort of having fun walking on this, but something's wrong. And it's minutes of this, which is a really long time if you know me, to
film.
be quiet.
Yeah.
And and thinking, wow, that's a story I have to tell her.
Yes.
That's a reality that she has to understand. And how do I do that in a way that doesn't create mistrust and hate and things that I don't want her to go out into the world with?
Difficult task, but necessary one.
And then, you know, we think about the history of Christianity and its relationship to Judaism, and it's a tough one. But I don't want her to walk out into the world and see Christians as people who will hate her, who will think of her as lesser, who will... But I have to tell her they'll say things to you that won't make sense, that will be hurtful. The world will not work in a way that understands the rhythm that you will be moving to. You'll have to make really hard choices in your life about how you live, who you marry, how you celebrate those rhythms, what you give up and what you hold on to. And they'll be different for her than for me. And my challenge as a parent and as a person who I hope is bringing that good light into the world is to give her the shield and spare her the need to have the sword.
Yeah.
You know, and it's hard. It's hard. You know it's hard. I know it's hard. Lots of people know it's hard. But I think that's the great challenge as we move into a time that's going to be really focused on religion. It has been for 5 years. What a coincidence that we're at that anniversary. And where really being able to see things and make allowances that the best might be in people, but prepare ourselves and reach across aisles that we never thought we could reach across, and see things in people that we didn't know we could see, and find a place for everybody is just, it's huge. It's hard to imagine at this moment. And yet there are really great people, smart people, caring people who are actively trying to do that in our community and around the world. And, you know, I think the best we can do is carry our load in terms of our daily choices and how we interact to make it easier instead of harder. But, you know, it's easier said than done.
Well, how would you do it on a daily basis? Because we're actually getting to a place where we're, you know, how would that diversity, for example, you know, I guess this is one of the last questions, and then it'll take less, you know, we have less than 2 minutes, but how does diversity play out in Judaism?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's diversity within Judaism,
Yes,
and we can certainly see from ritual to practice to clothing to food, or that you're going to find soup to nuts. But I think the challenge is, how is it going to play out in the broader world? How are we, just like every other ethnic and minority group, how are we going to be a part of the whole and still maintain what is unique, what is special, what is working for us?
Yeah.
And how do we invite our children to enter into that world with a sense of belonging and not fear? And how do we change the world to make it easier for them? I mean, I think it's easier for me than it was for my parents. It certainly was easier for them than their parents.
Yeah.
I worry sometimes whether it will be easier for my daughter than it was for me. I worry in this world that we're in right now that we're getting more polarized, not less. And how I choose to interact with that is in my daily occurrences to really try to live the values that I believe, to see that goodness in people, to challenge the things that I don't agree with, and to be willing to step forward and do what's right for myself and others.
Step forward with... Huh?
How silly, how cliche.
Step forward with chutzpah, even if they think you're a little meshuggah.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, I think the pieces that that we've just begun to touch on, even though you're not an expert, it's clear that you have a lot of knowledge, and we didn't cover everything on the paper.
Yeah, I have more notes.
But maybe you can suggest other things, and other people can actually. We're at the point in the program where we should remind you that if you like what you saw, that you should email liveclass at lanecc.edu, and questions, comments, what you think we should change or continue in the discussion. And I want to thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, it was great.
This is a conversation you and I have frequently.
Yes,
so
to have it on
the
camera
studio.
is great. So we'll be starting up again season 4 the second week of April. So be sure to tune in. Where are we at? Yeah, okay. So one of the things we should look at in terms of building bridges is that trying to see that light in each other, no matter what those differences are, and begin to look at making this world a better place for our children and each other as much as possible.
Seeing all the forks in the road and
Yes.
the many paths that we can travel.
Yeah.
That's what I would like to see people reference.
All right. So this has been DiversiTV. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time.